Initial Content presents Lennon's Last Weekend. In our fourth podcast, Andy Peebles relives more of his extraordinary interview with John Lennon, discusses John's classic album Imagine, his fallout with Paul McCartney, his struggle to acquire a green card to remain in America, and finally, the merits of the BBC's World Service. Other contributors include graphic artist and musician Klaus Voorman, producer and broadcaster Malcolm Gerrie, session musician Alan White, DJ Paul Gambaccini, and guitarist Earl Slick.
I'm often asked these days, what were the BBC like after the Lennon interview? I think, looking back, that the corporation basically did absolutely nothing. But nobody ever said to me, how are you feeling? Now, other people would say that I should have been offered counselling. I'm not sure how much counselling was actually available in 1980. I mean, I'm glad that I managed in the 24 or 48 hours directly after his death to get through and to hopefully be as professional as I possibly could be. But I still wonder whether the BBC might have served me better.
In December 1980, BBC journalist Andy Peebles flew to New York to interview the world's greatest rock star, John Lennon.
But I was really too scared to walk away. I was considering the life without the Beatles. What would it be? Ku Klux Klan were burning Beatle records and I was held up as a Satanist or something. The point of the bed in a nutshell, was a commercial for peace.
During the interview, Lennon revealed many things he'd never spoken about before.
We had a miscarriage or something, did we?
You had a miscarriage and I was there.
Here you got a guy who is so honest and open about everything.
I was just writing the experience I'd had of withdrawing from heroin.
His heartfelt honesty and candid revelations surprised everyone.
I call it my lost weekend. It lasted 18 months.
When he was without Yoko, it was like a little step backwards.
But what I did when she kicked me out was I hit the bottle like I was 18 and 19.
He spoke his mind about some of the most controversial moments in his life.
Because the most I could have done was gather a big gang of demonstrators together, which the police could have shot, so what are they complaining about?
You got a Beatle. You have an outspoken Beatle. Do you really think Richard Nixon gave a crap about him?
Lennon was asked how safe he felt in New York.
I can go right out this door now and go in a restaurant. You want to know how great that is?
48 hours later, he was gunned down in the street.
The realization that John Lennon, who I'd interviewed on Saturday night in New York, had died while I was flying over the Atlantic was a shattering experience.
We thought we were bringing back to Britain 8 reels of 12-inch tape. What we in fact brought back was one of the most important obituaries in the history of British popular music.
This was Lennon's last weekend. Having covered the March on Washington in the last podcast, Andy takes up the story.
Of the 4 Beatles, and I know Paul won't be offended, John was always my favourite. It really makes me quite emotional that people have asked me what was it like when you discovered that he'd been shot, murdered in cold blood. And I said, well, a bit like being told you won £200 million on the lottery, and then 2 days later somebody phones up and said, sorry, we got the numbers wrong. It's a bad analogy, but you know what I'm saying.
John has this thing, Instant Karma, just the title of the song.
Bass guitarist Klaus Voorman.
He wrote it in the morning, went to the studio, had us all there, played us the song, we sat down, we played it. And this little man was running around. Tiny little man, and he had PS on his shirt. And I thought, PS. I had no idea who this man was.
1970, as we move through, in February, Instant Karma, which was top 5, but here in America and in Britain as well. Phil Spector was involved there, John. I think somebody that you're pretty fond of.
Yeah, I am fond of his work. a lot. His personality, I'm not crazy about that, you know.
No. And you actually appeared on Top of the Pops. That was the first appearance by anybody connected with the Beatles for quite a while, wasn't it?
It was great. I love being first.
How did you feel about doing Top of the Pops
it was
after
great.
quite a time gap?
I enjoyed the Instant Karma thing because they're the people right there. Like the cabin, that's how we were with the fans, you know. They'd be at the door as we went in at lunchtime and they'd say, "Hey, John, will you sing, Sweet Little 16 for Margie and Pam, you know?" And it was on that level. I said, that's the kind of thing I miss with the direct communication where you could talk to the audience.
Yeah.
And you get in that sort of Madison Square Shea Stadium business where you have to overact, you know, you have to act like 18th century actors of grand drama, which is not my shtick. And I like that direct communication. That's why I like radio too.
Broadcaster Malcolm Gerrie.
One of the things I think is fascinating about the whole concept of Instant Karma, not just the speed at which it was recorded and released, is the whole concept of karma. For karma, read mindfulness. It's the same bloody thing.
She was knitting. You see, because we did everything together. Now, she wasn't singing on Instant Karma, so I'm doing Instant Karma live, and she's just sitting there knitting this scarf.
For somebody to just sit there and knit and have a bandage over the eyes, that's just funny. I thought it was great.
You know, there comes a time with pop music, and he said this to me over dinner. He said, "You know the people, Andy, who really annoy me?" He said, "Are these writers who write articles for the great newspapers, dissecting our music and telling us what we've done." He said, "As far as I'm concerned, it's poppycock." He said, "We wrote songs, simple as that. And if people like them, great. If they didn't, tough."
We moved to Imagine in November 1971, and if you were to say to most music programmers around the world which would be the John Lennon track that they would instantly pick to play, I think it would be Imagine. It's had fantastic airplay.
Well, actually, that should be credited as a Lennon-Ono song, because a lot of it, the lyric and the concept came from Yoko, but those days I was a bit more selfish, a bit more macho, and I sort of omitted to mention her contribution, but it was right out of Grapefruit, her book. There's a whole pile of pieces about imagine this and imagine that. And I give her credit now, long overdue.
Session drummer Alan White.
When we did get to doing Imagine, before we actually recorded Imagine, he gave us a lyric sheet for all the songs and said, "This is what you're going to be saying to the whole world by playing on this." He said, I want everybody who's going to play on it to go take half an hour, go read all the lyrics, and tell me if you want to play on it or not. No, I said, it's absolutely fine, it's great.
The way he uses the words, and it's so strong.
DJ Paul Gambaccini.
Imagine marked the return of John Lennon to top 40 friendly music.
I think it is. Imagine's probably the defining album of Lennon as a solo artist.
I have to say that on that Imagine album was a track called How Do You Sleep, which a lot of people considered was a swing at Mr. McCartney.
I actually was disappointed when I heard that, you know, the How Do You Sleep, because I just didn't like the acrimony between the pair of them, and I think so many people felt this. We didn't want them to fall out.
Well, I think I explained it pretty well in a Playboy interview, TNA, was that I used my resentment against Paul that I have as a kind of sibling rivalry resentment from youth to create a song.
Does it go back that far?
Oh, yeah. I mean, rivalry between two guys, you know? I mean, it was always there, but it was a creative rivalry.
But one of the fantastic things about listening to the interview that he did with Andy was he explains.
I think it's part of the charm. Like you say, like kids poking each other. He really likes to take the strong words to make the song strong and make it really. He wanted to really let steam off, and that's what he did.
As John Lennon said, anger is an energy, and that's obviously what he was tapping into.
I think it's valid, and I know that lots of people must have been very upset that John writes a song about his paw in that sort of way. But that's the way he is.
You know, I was heartbroken when the Beatles split up. But now, And because I've been lucky enough to get close to both John and Paul, I've never met Ringo, I never met George, but because I got close to John for that period of hours and to Paul on quite a few occasions, I feel I understand.
I used my resentment and withdrawing from Paul and the Beatles and the relationship with Paul to write How Do You Sleep. I don't really go around with those thoughts in my head all the time. I wanted to make a funky track, and this is a good way to make it.
Imagine truly established John Lennon as the paragon of peace.
In 72, a deportation case.
Dun, 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 dun.
And Yoko, I think you were going through problems because you had a custody situation for your daughter.
We still can't find my daughter, and also we have to maybe leave this country that we love very much.
Lennon's involvement in the anti-war movement put him in the crosshairs of the Nixon administration just as the president was running for re-election. His association with prominent activists Abbie Hoffman and Pete Hamill resulted in 24-hour surveillance by the FBI.
We had lost Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy in assassinations in 1968, and many people were looking around for a leader, someone who embodied the values of our generation.
Because I believe that sometimes it is necessary to draw the line clearly, not to have enmity against those who disagree, but to make it clear that there can be no compromise where such great issues as self-determination and freedom and a just peace are involved.
Lennon was now the one who was the historic public figure, particularly since he was embroiled against Richard Nixon.
When it first started, I was followed in a car, and my phone was tapped. Now, we lost the phone tapping case because how do you prove your phone was tapped? Now, at that time, it was pre-Watergate, so you can imagine John Lennon says his phone's tapped and there's men following in the car.
The idea of deporting Lennon came from Senator Strom Thurmond. The Republican from South Carolina sent a letter to the White House.
Of course, what really punctuated Nixon's paranoia was, you've got to remember, this was the first time that 18-year-olds could actually have the vote.
Thurmond advised deporting Lennon, whose presence he thought would encourage millions of anti-war Beatle fans at the polls. The US government's case centered around the marijuana conviction Lennon received in London in 1968.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
I was convicted of possession in England and fined £100. I was told to plead guilty rather than get into trouble.
Is that the obstacle to your staying here?
Yeah.
His problem seems to be the marijuana conviction. And while that stands, there's no form of relief that's possible in his case. And even though he presents witnesses of the highest character, I'm afraid it can't overcome that conviction.
You don't think there's any possibility that the government is trying to harass the Lennons?
Absolutely not. This is the kind of treatment we would dish out to anybody convicted of a narcotics offense.
You could criticize me, probably, for not making more about John's relationship, or complete lack of it, with Richard Nixon, and the fact that his green card became a major problem, and that John was obviously deemed highly dangerous by the FBI and the relatives of a certain Mr. Hoover.
The case would bring to light the discretion immigration officials actually have in deciding who gets deported.
They're even sort of changing their own rules to get us, just because we're peaceniks, really.
Do you think it's because of your anti-war action and not your marijuana conviction then?
Well, let's say that a few friends of ours in the pop business have exactly the same conviction as me and are allowed to come and go as free as they like. They just don't happen to have the same point of view as me, or they don't state it.
Will you now stop speaking out against the war?
No, nothing will stop me, and whether I'm here or wherever I may be, I'll always have the same feelings and say what I feel,
It's not an era that I claim to be anywhere near expert about, but I know that it drove John mad, and that I think at stages made him feel pretty ill, because here he was in this ghastly catch-22 situation. He'd been told by this stage, I think I'm right in saying, that if you leave America, we will not let you back in. So there was the dichotomy.
In March 1972, Lennon's visa was revoked. The White House then launched a major initiative to get Lennon deported.
Another complicating factor is Mrs. Lennon's 8-year-old daughter by a former marriage. The child is still with her father despite a court order giving her legal custody. Although Mrs. Lennon could be granted citizenship, she contends that deporting her husband would force her into an unfair choice between him or her child.
What's the status of your search for your child?
Well, we just can't find her, and it's frightening, really. And what the immigration is asking me to do, really, is to take a decision on whether choosing my husband or my child.
The Lennons attracted a crowd at the Immigration and Naturalization Office in Lower Manhattan. They held hands throughout the 30-minute hearing as their attorney Leon Wiles argued against deportation. He asked for more time to try to get the marijuana conviction removed from Lennon's record in England. He also asked for time to secure several prominent witnesses, possibly a member of Congress and a member of Parliament, to testify as character witnesses.
But Mayor Lindsay in New York did a lot of things on your behalf, did he not, around about that era?
He was very good to us. You know, said lots of things like we should welcome artists to our shores, because this is the haven, isn't it? It's got the big Iron Lady on the sea there saying, welcome to the shores, you know, and they were trying to kick me out. And
the way the U.S. government and Richard Nixon treated John Lennon was, in hindsight, kind of funny.
Guitarist Earl Slick.
Because what's the best way that a sneak and liar can get away with it? Create a diversion. You got a Beatle. You have an outspoken Beatle. Perfect. Do you really think Richard Nixon gave a crap about him? I don't think so.
it's ridiculous when you look back on it. Because the most I could have done was gather a big gang of demonstrators together, which the police could have shot, you know, so what are they complaining about?
So that was really John's sense of humour. I mean, sharp as a razor and gloves off right on the chin.
Now, sure, John was stirring up a lot of shit about the war, and it was causing ripples, but he could have easily dealt with that without putting John under investigation and trying to keep him out of the country. He used it as a smokescreen.
In October 1975, Lennon won his case against the U.S. government.
Does that mean you're seeking permanent citizenship?
Yes, we are.
Permanent resident?
Yeah.
Hi.
On July 27, 1976, Lennon was finally granted his green card.
I just feel overwhelmed because, as usual, there's a great woman behind every idiot. And she's the one, and she kept me together. You know, I would have fallen apart a long time ago. And she pulled me through it, and here I am. I thank her. God bless her.
Lennon's lawyer, Leon Wiles, sued Attorney General John Mitchell for his conspiratorial attempts to deport Lennon. The investigation turned up documents from Hoover and H.R. Haldeman proving Nixon's political motives were the reason for the deportation attempts. The victory coincided with the birth of John and Yoko's son Sean. Nixon soon became embroiled in the Watergate scandal.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Richard Nixon's resignation in August 1974 effectively ended the fight against Lennon. Nixon is the only US president ever to have resigned. Yoko was not fully reunited with her daughter Kyoko until 1997.
Everybody hoped when he got his green card that he would come home. But sadly, he never did.
I mean, this planned trip to England for February 1981 probably would have happened because he got the card by then. So I think he could have come back to Britain and then returned to America. But he'd gone through a very, very difficult period. And, you know, if you jump on bandwagons, credit to you for doing it, if you have an implicit belief in something, political or otherwise, you're taking a risk. And the authorities were tough. I mean, I think it's a bit wrong having to mention the name of Richard Nixon, given his career as President of the United States of America, or towards the end of it, a distinct lack of it. I think it's hilarious, if you want my view, that he could be remonstrating about one of the world's greatest musicians while not telling the truth about Watergate. But hey-ho, it comes to those who try not to tell the truth.
November 1973 and the Mind Games album, John.
This is the BBC World Service.
You do that well, you do that well.
Yes, I was listening in, I told you before, Bermuda, Singapore, Cape Town.
Here is an illustrated summary of the news.
One of the funniest things I think about the interview is when John berates Margaret Thatcher, who famously at the time was trying to shut down the BBC World Service.
May I just comment on that?
Please do.
Come to mind.
Please do.
I read the papers when the PM, Margaret Thatcher, was going to cut the BBC World Service down. That would be the greatest disservice to peace, love and understanding in the world, because you really appreciate it, and every country does, that you don't know how important it is.
John was obviously mortified by this because, again, speaking to his homesickness, this was a kind of lifeline back into, England and Liverpool and everything else that was going on back at home.
You must remember, these were pre-internet days. You could not see the evening news or listen to the Today programme, but you could listen to the BBC World Service.
John was a child of the 50s, and I remember, growing up in England in the 50s and the early 60s. All you had was kind of BBC radio, really. And you listened to these programmes like the Saturday Club, with Brian Matthew, where you used to have bands on, the Kinks and the Yardbirds and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And then the Billy Cotton band show on a Sunday, which was this kind of big band show, wakey, wakey. Everyone like, oh my God, what's that? And Sing Something Simple, which was like these choruses of people singing cover versions of pop songs. It was like, oh my God, I want to jump into the River Tyne. And that was it, the light programme they had, a thing called the light programme, which was, it wasn't just light, it was kind of, invisible.
Our whole ideals are presented by the BBC, and they're the only ones that can do it. The Americans don't have the system, they don't have the contacts in all the countries because they didn't have the Commonwealth of the Empire.
I don't need to tell you, dear listener, this was a man with principles. This was a man who called a spade a shovel. This was a man who berated Margaret Thatcher for contemplating closing down the BBC World Service or cutting its budget back. I mean, John was incensed about that. He really was.
Better to sell off some of the church property and finance the radio.
It must have been quite extraordinary for the four guys suddenly playing on BBC radio, on the Saturday Club in particular, and watching their career just explode, beyond anybody's comprehension. And there they were performing to the nation, whereas weeks before they'd been trying to earn a crust in Hamburg.
It's very important, and people appreciate it all over. All the races on earth listen to that. And it's very important, and because I travel and listen, I hear it and I talk to people about it. And everybody's listening. So, Mind Games.
The BBC World Service.
Mind Games is what they're playing with the world, and they have to keep it up.
John had grown up with the BBC as part of his regular life. The Beatles were regulars. As a matter of fact, in Lower Regent Street, the theatre, I believe, is called the Paris Theatre, where they made so many sessions. And there's that album, The Beatles at the Beeb. They were on top of the pops so often, but we don't know it today because the BBC, in an effort to save tape, reused tape. And so John would have pleasant experiences and fond memories of the BBC.
And I ought to say that during that period, you two went through a bit of a breakup, didn't you?
Yeah, I call it my lost weekend. It lasted 18 months when the feminist side of me died slightly, and she said, "Get the hell out."
When he was without Yoko, it was like a little step backwards somehow. He was no hold. He had no hold to it. He was not happy.
But now I come to the no qualm or conscience section of my thoughts about Yoko. She certainly gleaned a reputation in the business, of being somebody with whom it was incredibly hard to work and negotiate with, which I suppose gave me that false feeling when our friendship hit a peak a year on from John's death. I thought, she obviously likes you and she trusts you. But that wasn't going to last forever.
In our fifth and final podcast, John Lennon discusses his breakup with Yoko Ono, making the album Double Fantasy, his secret desire to have been a comedian, and his own personal security living in the city of New York. Lennon's Last Weekend was narrated by Neil McCormick, produced by Scott Mullaney, written, directed and edited by Brian Grant.